Hi everybody, welcome back to Moscone West. We're here, this is day 2 of our continuous coverage, live coverage of RSAC 2025. My name is Dave Vellante, I'm here with Chandra, I'm going to try it, Gnanasambandam.
Oh wow,
Almost.
That's well done, Dave.
Gnanasambandam.
Well done.
Which in Sanskrit means linked with knowledge.
Exactly right.
I feel more spiritual just hanging out with you.
Yeah,
man.
you're talking to the right person.
Yeah, right. Well, theCUBE is all about sharing knowledge, so welcome, really appreciate it.
Thank you, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
You bet. Chandra's the CTO and Executive Vice President of Product at SailPoint, so we can get deep. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit more about SailPoint for those who might not be familiar with it.
Sure. Dave, SailPoint is really one of the leading identity security platforms in the world, right? And
Indeed.
you know, we're really unique in 2 different ways, quite frankly. You know, vis-a-vis others. One is really the breadth of coverage of identities we have, everything from the human workforce to third parties, contractors, machines, increasingly bots and agents, and the depth of coverage, meaning we are very, very fine-grained. We go down to not just the applications, not just access or application, we go down to the entitlement and the data row and column level. And so it's really the breadth of coverage and the depth of it. That is where we are actually quite unique.
So I love this little line that you guys shared with me because I think it was 2 or 3 years ago I wrote a post of why security is facing an identity crisis. And you guys have brought that sort of concept to agentic.
Yeah.
Right, and so everybody's doing agentics, a lot of agent washing, it's another threat vector. So why is agentic why does that bring back this identity crisis?
Yeah, look, the top line is, we think it's a bit of a crisis because it's the #1 reason that AI and agentic adoption is slow today. You know, is really because you can't get identities, governance and access control right, and just security right? And so let me just explain,
please,
what I mean by that, right? Is so I'll start by what do we mean by agents, because everyone has their own definition of what an agent is,
place to
right?
start, yeah.
So to us, an agent is autonomous, goal seeking, will use other tools to get things done, is very, very action oriented, and by tools I mean it can use LLMs, APIs, service calls, and so on. And number 4, it's executing mission-critical business processes, okay? That is really what constitutes an agent for us. Now, if you were to break it down, right, every one of them, identity is core to really getting that done, right? So let me take a few.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
before
please.
You go on? When you say goal seeking, I infer from that there's a set of top-down goals that you can impose, I don't know if that's the right term, on the agents, and they will adhere to those edicts. Is that?
No, it's solving a business problem,
Okay.
And so let's say that you have an agent for dynamically booking your travel.
Yeah.
And so, you will say, get me from point A to point B, and you could change your meeting schedule, you could be running late, flights could be running late. It will automatically adjust and do what a manual travel agent would do. Or if you are a bank, you want to automate some part of your loan origination process. And they are, by the way, large banks are using it, right?
Oh, yeah,
They're using agents to automate some part of the loan origination process. In some cases, all of it for loans under a particular amount. And in those cases, they will say, here are the boundary conditions and for the loan approval and all the policies involved in it. And then it'll say, go and see whether we can underwrite this loan. And so it's really solving a business problem. That's really what I mean by goal seeking.
It has essentially the understanding of that business problem and it executes according to that. Okay, sorry, I threw you off your thought process there, but let's come back to where you were, which is essentially helping people understand, okay, we understand what agents are, what the characteristics of these agents are, and there's a big spectrum of how people are applying these things.
Exactly.
And so, please,
yeah.
carry on.
And so, let's really break it down because, the complexity, the identity complexity is in the detail, right? Because at the surface level, you're like, apply some identity governance to it and then it's done, right? When you really think of them as reasoning agents that are goal-seeking and are independently taking some actions, they are actually nothing but a digital workforce. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so just like how you managed a human workforce in terms of the applications they can access and the data they can access, you have to manage these, you have to govern and manage these agents because they are actually a digital workforce, right? And so what it means is you can have an agent, let's say it's your travel agent, right? Booking your travel. It will have access to your calendar. It will have access to the flights you want to book and your accounts, your credit card details, right? And so it's got to be bound. It's got to be governed. The permissions it has to be mapped back to you, Dave. Okay? And that is really hard to do. I'm making it sound very, very easy. Mapping what an agent can do to the same permission that the human that it is representing. It is a hard engineering problem to solve.
That's an identity crisis right there.
It is really an identity crisis because if you take a large corporation, a Fortune 100 or a Fortune 500, a Global 3000, most of the mission critical business processes are executing on really older platforms, right? I don't want to use the word legacy because it makes it sound bad, but these are like mission critical platforms. They are still running on a mainframe. If you are banks, you have core banking platforms running on mainframes. If you are a hospital system, these agents will have to, for like clinical decisioning, they are going to access radiology systems, electronic medical record systems that are older platforms, and governing and providing access control and sort of permission for them to access. These really involve, you've got to have connectors to connect to all these applications, you know what I mean? And so that is what makes this problem really hard because if it were all about accessing the modern cloud platforms, it is actually an easier problem to solve. All the startups have connectors and have experience in managing access to the modern cloud platforms. When you go to real large corporations, right, the cloud platforms are a core part of it, but they have lots of older platforms and older applications, and you've got to be able to govern access to them and manage all the complexities. This is where SailPoint comes in. For 20 years, that is what we have been doing. And so that's why we are very, very bullish in how we have a differentiated value proposition instead of solving this identity crisis that is in the agentic world today.
So organizations clearly aren't prepared for this. Frankly, they're not well prepared for AI, in my view, because go back to they have a data problem. Everybody has a data problem. And so SailPoint helps with this problem. I triggered something in my brain because you're solving this problem for yourselves, so you have insight as to how organizations can solve it. I would suspect that you're not as complicated of an organization as a 100-year-old bank,
yeah,
right, in terms of your data platform, and you've got technologists that can solve this. But how prepared are organizations for this agentic, era, and how is SailPoint positioned to help them?
Yeah, look, I think context is important here. Like in terms of readiness, this is still new. Yeah. Agentic is still new. AI, we have been talking about it for a long time, but companies seriously doing it and adopting is also newer. So, so I don't want to make this problem look much bigger than what it is. I think we are still early in the game, but I don't think most companies are well prepared, right? I think so. This is where we come in, right? And like it's largely just because of the complexity, right? And by the way, agents and data go hand in hand, right? They are really two sides of the same coin. So when we talk about agentic, you have to start with data. And so the question is, do they have their data ready, which is do they have data security and data governance ready for both structured data and unstructured data? That's step one. Step two then is sort of overlaying the agentic model on it, because for agents to do anything, they are going to be able to access data, right? And so you have to solve for both of them. and the complexity of the readiness, or they are not quite ready today because one, the maturity of most of the corporations in terms of managing human identity is actually not very good, by the way. If you take the largest 10,000 corporations in the world, and we have a maturity framework in terms of where they are, less than 15% of them are in the most advanced, mature stage.
Makes it very hard to automate then.
Exactly, right? And so even for the human workforce, which we have had for as long as mankind has existed, right? The identity governance or identity security and management is not very advanced. Now we are adding data to it, we are adding agents to it, we are adding machines to it, right? And by the way, when I say machines, I don't mean manufacturing machines. I mean APIs, service calls, bots, and so on. Mm-hmm. And so the complexity of the identities we are governing, these large corporations are governing, is actually exploding. And when you think about machines and agents, by the way, it's sort of apply a multiplication factor to actually the human identities. And so we're, to start with, human identities aren't managed well. We are adding machines and agents to it, which has a multiplier effect. And so we are sort of starting with a foundation that's not strong, and we are adding more and more to it. Yeah?
I interviewed with George Gilbert, my colleague, Mark Benioff, the other day. And when I was prepping for the interview, I read his Wall Street Journal article. It was an op-ed or whatever, but the title of it was something to the effect of, I will be the last generation of CEOs managing human-only employee workforce. And my question to him, which it was an awesome interview, but I actually don't think I got an answer to this, so I'm going to sort of point it into a security context. My question to him was, well, what have you learned in managing all these agents that you're building with Agent Force, what they're doing, and how are you managing differently? And I'm not sure I got an answer, but so my question is, how in this new world, where we're not just managing humans, we're managing machines, how are organizations going to be managed and managers going to be managing differently?
Yeah, look, I think there are some similarities and some differences, right? So, I think, but they are more, by the way, they are not that dissimilar is what I would say, right? So that is why we are actually quite bullish on taking our learning and our expertise instead of managing.
They're not that dissimilar. You mean managing humans versus managing humans and agents?
Exactly.
There's a lot of there's more, it's like Democrats and Republicans, more similarities than differences, I always say.
Exactly, that is really okay. Our point of view on that, right? And there are nuances that are actually exactly not the same, but they are not that dissimilar, right?
Okay.
And so, here is a way to think about it, right? Conceptually, humans mostly access applications for a long time, and applications access data. All right, for the longest time, as long as you manage the human to application chain and governed it, you are quite secure from an identity perspective. Now, increasingly, humans are accessing data, not going through applications. If you're a data scientist, if you are a machine learning scientist, you are not necessarily going through application to access data. You're going straight to data. If you are a machine for training, if you are a foundation model, right, being trained, you're not going through an application, you're going straight to data. And increasingly, so machines and agents go straight to data. And so you have to now govern the human to application chain, human to data chain, machine to data chain, agent to machine to data chain. You know what I mean?
I do, because
conceptually, that is really the problem you have to solve.
I think of Agentic as sort of flipping the whole model of applications on its head, whereas traditionally applications are hard-coded. The processes in applications are hard-coded. Here's how we do it, code it, and that's how we do it. And you live by that process, and in the future, we're going to go directly to data. We're going to create processes essentially on the fly to meet the market conditions, but there's an infinite number of possibilities there that have to be governed and secured. If I understand it correctly, Chandra, you're saying the responsibility of securing those processes lived inside of the application, or that securing that data lived inside of the application. It was the responsibility of the application. It was sort of a comfort domain, And now it's Wild West all over again.
Well, I would say it was a joint responsibility, not just the application of the identity platform that actually governed that application, by the way.
But you would be able to speak to that application in a way that was integrated.
Exactly, that was our strength, right? Now the most critical piece in this chain is linking these agents and machine back to the identity, because all of the machines and agents are acting on behalf of a human. If you are executing, let's say, an agent booking travel for you, it is acting on your behalf. And so it has to be mapped to you as an identity. If it's underwriting a loan for a bank, it is acting on behalf of an underwriter. It has to be linked to the identity of that underwriter. And this is a linkage that's really, really hard to solve. This is where we come in, because what we understand best is the human identity. Now what we are doing is we are linking that human identity to the machines that are representing those humans and those agents that are representing the humans in executing any of the mission critical business processes. This is, by the way, this is really the fundamental differentiation of SailPoint.
Okay, so that gets me to a topic that I love, which is knowledge graphs, or maybe I should call them identity graphs here. You know, you think about knowledge graphs, they bring the expressiveness of a graphical expressiveness and the query, but the query flexibility, you have to go back 15 years, but it's always worked in security because you've got technical expertise and you can solve that problem. Now there are a lot of companies today that are bringing in sort of SQL-like capabilities with knowledge graphs, so I get very excited about that. Apply that to identity graphs. How do not, because when I think of agentic, the data has to be harmonized, and that to me speaks to knowledge graphs or identity. So how are you doing that? Maybe it's part of the secret sauce. How does it apply in this world?
It's actually a fundamental part of our secret sauce, and it's a core part of what we call the Atlas platform, right? Which is our identity platform. Mm-hmm. So we are building, I'll say with confidence, we are building the world's largest identity graph, okay? And it has two components to it, right? Component one is all identity data inside a company in one place, okay? And so if you are a large bank, you are a large hospital system, a large media company, right? You have the workforce, you have third-party employees and contractors, you have APIs, bots, LLMs, large language models, small language models, agents, right? We can having all of that, all of the identity for all of that in one place, okay? That's really part one of the graph, okay? And that's what we have today, right? And that's in the platform, it's in one place. Part two of the graph is where, Dave, it gets really, really interesting, which is, that is you could call static data or sort of admin time data, right? Which is, I have your identity, I have all the permissions you have to all the applications inside a corporation, right? What about real time, which is really the layer we are adding on the graph, which is, that is what you have permission for, but is that really the way you are actually using it? Are you doing more than what you have permission for? Are you doing less than what you have permission for? Let's say that you are permissioned to do something, but you have not used it in 3 months. Should you still have permission for it? Or should that be revoked till you start using it again? And so that requires a real-time view in terms of what your access patterns are inside an application at an entitlement level, at a very fine-grained level. We are adding that real-time dynamic layer, as well, right? And so that is what constitutes an identity graph. The question is, so what, right? Okay, fine, you have this graph.
Well, I think
what do you do with
it's
it?
because you can do policy enforcement at machine speeds. I mean, that's the so what, isn't it?
Well, yes, and let me sort of build on that, right? Because
the how you do it, I don't know.
Oh, no, the what, right? There are really two different parts of what here, Dave, that are actually very, very
let's stick with the what then.
Yeah, right. Part one of the what is really this concept that standing privilege, right? It's just not relevant anymore, right? Meaning, more than 90% of the identities have standing privilege, right? Meaning, once you have permission to do something inside an application, inside your company, that's static. You'll have it forever. And that really makes you, that is very risky in today's world because the threat vectors are so much, right? we can't really afford to have you have standing privilege or static privilege for most of your applications. Instead, if you have the graph, we can do just-in-time privilege. We can do just-in-time access, right? And so we would say, hey, you are accessing a mission-critical, let's say, asset or a resource inside your company, right? When you are inside the building, accessing it from the VPN, you're actually good to go. But you are here now, in RSA, you are accessing it from public Wi-Fi. We will say it's not that secure. And we will say, we're not going to let you do that, although you have the permission, right? That's what I mean by just-in-time. To do that well, you need signals, real-time signaling, which is what we have feeding into the graph. So the first what of having the graph is the ability to solve or provide just-in-time privilege, okay? And this goes back to this concept of zero trust, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
And which has been a philosophy so far. We are sort of operationalizing it, okay?
And it's right, and that's the big gripe on zero trust is how do I operationalize it?
And this is our view, right? And the foundation for doing that is actually the graph, okay? The second what is actually threat intelligence. Once you have the graph, Dave, now just imagine, right? Let's say that there is a breach. Let's say your account has been breached. By the way, our view is that the bad actors are not breaking in anymore; they're actually logging in. And you've got to assume if you're a large corporation, there is a breach on at any given point in time. Anyone that says, I have no breach inside my corporation, I don't think it's true. You've got to assume there is always a breach that's on, right? Now, what happens when you have a breach? You have a SOC, you're doing analysis to find out who has breached. The dwell time, by the way, is close to like 60 days, meaning once a breach is in, the bad actor is in the network for like 60-ish days, right? So you've got to know what is the blast radius of this bad actor, of this role that has been breached. What are the access pathways through which they can get access to my critical resources? If you have the graph, it is a foundation for answering those kinds of questions, which is massive intelligence from an identity perspective inside a SOC. So those are the two whats. Those are two mission-critical problems, security problems you can solve as a CISO if you have the graph, which is what we are building.
This just-in-time privilege is actually quite fascinating, Chandra, and so you can do policy enforcement, and also you're situational.
Yes.
The example that you gave of an open Wi-Fi, for instance, like the one at RSAC, and ironic, isn't it? And but also but access approval.
Exactly.
In real time, if in fact you know it's safe, and ideally you can limit the false positives or the false negatives. Right?
That's exactly right. And by the way, you can still have a human in the loop, meaning it doesn't have to be adjudicated automatically, right? So let's say that we find some access to be risky. We could actually trigger an event to your manager or to your colleague or to a security professional saying, hey, this seems risky, should Dave still be allowed to access this? And they can say yes. And by the way, the trick in this is doing this in real time. So what it requires is millisecond, microsecond response time, right? Because you don't want to be waiting there saying, well, I want to get into this application, what is it doing, right?
Can and I know we're over time here, but can in the human in the loop example, if there's an exception or you have to go to the human in the loop, can the agents, or will they at some point in time be able to learn from the reasoning traces of the humans such that the next time that episode occurs, the agents will be able to handle it?
Totally, right? And so in fact, we have two different agents in the market. We are one of the few security vendors that have any agents in the market. We have two in the market today, by the way, that our customers are using, which is one is a search agent. So think of us as like a Google search for identities inside a corporation that use our platform. The second one is what we call the workflow builder, right? So you can conversationally say, hey, SailPoint agent, build this workflow for me to go execute this action inside, from an identity perspective. It'll build the workflow and it will execute the action for you, right? And so those, by the way, continuously learn. Based on the questions you are asking it, every day it's learning. So it'll get smarter and smarter in answering the question. For instance, you can if you are a manager, you can ask it a questions like, hey, how many of my people have entitlements they have not used in the past month? It will answer the question. You don't have to go run a report. You don't have to write a script and run a report, right? And the more you ask the question, it'll get very smart about answering that.
And that workflow that example that you just gave, that's a dynamic process. You've got essentially building blocks from data, from process logic.
Exactly.
That's not static process anymore.
Bingo.
It fits the situation. That's exciting times. I'm going to have you back and
exactly
and dig into that. Like,
so we've got some basic predicates to build a workflow, but it'll sort of dynamically compose it. And the beauty is, it's plain English. You are telling it in plain English.
Yes.
So this is a massive innovation, right? Which is, you no longer have to be a security or an identity admin to build these workflows. You can be a user. So we are actually democratizing access to these identity platforms, because a manager can say, I would like you to build this workflow and execute this action, and the platform will go do it for you, right? So that's what an agent does. So we're sort of democratizing access to identity platforms for all users inside a corporation and not just admins.
Chandra, great conversation. Would love to have you back.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you having me here.
You're very welcome.
Thank
all
you.
right, and thank you for watching, everybody. This is Dave Vellante for John Furrier, Jackie McGuire, and John Olczyk. You're watching RSAC 2025 on theCUBE, and we'll be right back right after this short break.